Supreme Councilor Vexner Nara, with a dramatic flourish of her four upper limbs, declared, "We welcome the newest species to join our esteemed Galactic Council peace talks, the humans." A cacophony of clicks, whistles, and translator-modulated murmurs erupted within the Grand Chamber. As senior diplomatic recorder Thris Bakarin, I had the misfortune of being seated directly behind the Moldovan delegation, whose scent glands activated in times of anxiety. The odor was unforgettable. Are they serious? These humans? Ambassador Kraft of the Zorlaxian Imperium whispered to his aide, loud enough for half the chamber to hear. The same beings who responded to our initial contact message with something they call a meme? I struggled to suppress a laugh. The diplomatic incident had become legendary. The humans had indeed answered our solemn greeting with an animated image of a dancing baby, accompanied by the text, "New phone, who dis?" It required 17 xenolinguists 3 months to ascertain that it wasn't a declaration of war. Supreme Councilor Vex Nara tapped her ceremonial staff, crafted from the sacred trees of Andromeda, 3 times upon the polished floor. Order! I demand order in this council. Her voice resounded through the translation systems, generating feedback that caused several ultrasonic delegates to wince and cover their auditory receptors. The humans, she continued, with strained dignity, have exhibited remarkable technological progress in the brief span of 3 centuries since achieving faster-than-light travel. Their diplomatic presence here is unconventional, yet potentially valuable. This was the understatement of the galactic cycle. The humans had advanced at a rate unparalleled in recorded history, bypassing developmental phases that had taken other species millennia. Their spacecraft were ungainly, boxy contraptions that defied logic, yet somehow outperformed the sleek Axon vessels, the product of thousands of years of meticulous engineering. Their weaponry was primitive, but devastatingly effective. Their economy was chaotic and unpredictable, yet somehow flourishing. The chamber doors parted, and a hush fell over the assembled representatives of 246 spacefaring civilizations. 5 ordinary-looking bipeds entered. No ceremonial robes, no honor guards, no floating platforms or environmental suits, just 5 humans in what my database identified as business casual attire, whatever that was. "Hey everyone, sorry we're late. Traffic, am I right?" the lead human, a female with curly auburn hair, called out with a wave. "I'm Ambassador Priya Nakamura. This is my team, Dr. Marcus Chen, our xenobiologist, Commander Olivia Washington, military liaison, Thomas Rodriguez, trade negotiator, and Ben Fletcher, cultural attaché." The Kolari delegation nearly fainted at this flagrant violation of the 17-step formal introduction protocol. I documented their distress for the official record, while concealing my own amusement. Ambassador Kraft rose to his full 3-meter height, his ceremonial headpiece wobbling precariously. "This is an outrage. These primitives dare address the council without proper deference, without the ritual of 7 genuflections." The human named Ben Fletcher stepped forward, a smile that seemed both affable and predatory playing on his lips. "Ambassador, with all due respect, we reviewed your protocols and found 17 major logical inconsistencies, 39 inefficiencies, and 1 portion that technically constitutes a blood sacrifice under Earth law. We've prepared a revised version that accomplishes the same diplomatic goals without requiring anyone to kneel for 3 hours or donate genetic material." He held up a single sheet of paper. 1 sheet. I had never witnessed a Zorblaxian rendered speechless before. It was magnificent. Supreme Councilor Vexner Nara, ever the pragmatist, merely sighed. "Very well. The council acknowledges the human delegation. Please take your seats so we may begin." As they walked to their designated area, I overheard Commander Washington mutter, 10 credits says they try to patronize us within the first 5 minutes. Dr. Chen replied, "Make it 20 and include a passive-aggressive comment about our quaint little solar system, and you've got a bet." I knew then that these peace talks would be anything but dull. 3 standard cycles into the peace negotiations, the human delegation had proven surprisingly competent, and irritatingly so. They posed questions that had gone unasked for millennia. They proposed solutions that were embarrassingly obvious in retrospect. And worst of all, at least according to the ancient Thri Confederation, they kept bringing snacks to the negotiation table. "Those crumbs will attract void mites. Ambassador Loraxi had complained for the 14th time as Thomas Rodriguez opened something called Doritos. But the incident, the one that changed everything, occurred during discussions of the neutral zone between Kortalik and Vesperian space. Grand Marshal Parallax of the Vesperians slammed his metallic gauntlet on the table. The Queertalik have breached the boundary 7 times in the past cycle. Their mining operations extend beyond the agreed limits. Preposterous accusations. Supreme Judicator Nevila of the Queertalik hissed through her breathing apparatus. Our sensors clearly indicate all operations are within our territory. The Vesperians are the ones establishing military outposts disguised as scientific research stations. I recorded furiously as the argument escalated. The two species had been on the verge of war for centuries. This territorial dispute was precisely why these peace talks had been convened. Ambassador Nakamura had been unusually quiet all morning. Now she stood, holding a small data pad. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the bickering. "We've been analyzing the boundary dispute using our own scanning technologies. May I present our findings?" Without waiting for permission, typical human behavior, she projected a 3-dimensional map of the disputed sector. "Both delegations are partially correct," she began diplomatically. "The Queertalik mining operations do indeed stay within their technical boundary if measured by standard polynomial spatial equations. However, the Vesperians are correct that the quantum effects of these operations extend approximately 0.76 light-years beyond the boundary." Marshal Parallax looked smug. "However," Nakamura continued, "the Vesperians have indeed established 3 military installations within the zone, disguised with sensor-dampening technology here, here, and here." The map highlighted 3 locations. Judicator Nevila's eyes widened in vindication. Both sides have violated the spirit of the agreement while adhering to its technical parameters. We propose a revised boundary calculation that accounts for quantum drift and establishes a joint monitoring system with representatives from neutral parties. It was an elegant solution, too elegant. Ambassador Kraft rose slowly. "How convenient that the humans possess this information that our own best sensors couldn't detect. One might wonder how they acquired such detailed scans of a restricted zone." The chamber grew silent. "Are you suggesting we've been spying?" Commander Washington asked, her voice dangerously calm. Kraft's mouthparts curved into what his species considered a smile. "I'm merely noting that for a species so new to galactic affairs, you seem remarkably informed. Perhaps humans have been more active in this sector than we've been led to believe." "We've been transparent about our survey vessels," Nakamura replied firmly. "Have you shown us all of them?" Kraft turned to address the council. "My government has evidence of unregistered human ships using experimental cloaking technology throughout this sector for the past 7 cycles. They claim to come in peace, yet they watch us from the shadows." Murmurs swept through the chamber. I noted at least 37 delegates looking alarmed. Nakamura's face remained impressively neutral, but Dr. Chen whispered something in her ear. She nodded once. "Acknowledged," she announced. "In light of these accusations, the human delegation will withdraw from these proceedings until diplomatic channels can address these concerns appropriately." She gathered her materials with deliberate calm. "We will return to Earth space immediately." And just like that, they left. No drama, no threats, they simply walked out. "Good riddance," Ambassador Kraft declared, raising a ceremonial chalice of fermented Zorblaxian tree sap. In the private chamber, to the departure of the most insufferable species to ever waltz into galactic politics, the gathering of like-minded diplomats, those who had opposed human inclusion from the start, responded with a chorus of agreements in various biological mechanisms of vocalization. The ultrasonic delegates emitted high-pitched squeals that made my recording equipment protest. The methane consortium released celebratory gas clouds that required the environmental systems to work overtime. I was present only as the official recorder, but even I had to admit the atmosphere was festive, disgustingly so. "Did you see how quickly they capitulated?" Grand Marshal Parallax boomed, his armored exoskeleton gleaming under the bioluminescent lighting. "One accusation, not even a formal censure, and they scurried back to their backwater solar system." Supreme Judicator Nebula, surprisingly present despite her earlier conflict with Parallax, waved a sensory appendage dismissively. Weakness, as expected from such an evolutionary aberration. They achieved spaceflight before resolving their own territorial disputes, barbarians with engines. The gathering devolved into increasingly creative insults toward humanity. The Thry ambassador suggested humans were secretly descended from a particularly unintelligent form of space algae. The Kolari representative performed a ritualistic dance meant to cleanse the council chambers of human spiritual contamination. Only Ambassador Zillik of the Andorian technocracy remained quiet, nursing his drink with all three of his hands. "You seem troubled, Zillik," Ambassador Kraft slurred, clearly affected by his fourth chalice. "Surely you're not mourning the humans' departure? Your people were among the first to question their inclusion." Zillik's central eye blinked slowly. "We question their motives, not their capabilities. There is a difference." Kraft laughed. "What capabilities? Their ships look like they were designed by intoxicated Luray." "And yet," Zillik replied softly, "those ships outperform ours in every metric except aesthetics." An uncomfortable silence fell over one section of the gathering, though the celebrations continued elsewhere. "You worry too much," Marshal Parallax declared, slapping Zillik on the back hard enough to make his eye stalk wobble. The humans were a minor player. Their withdrawal changes nothing substantive. Supreme Counselor Vex Nara glided into the chamber then, her ceremonial robes shimmering with embedded status indicators. The celebrations dimmed as she approached our group. "I see some of you are pleased with today's developments," she observed, her tone neutral but her secondary appendages twitching in what I recognized as disapproval. "Simply enjoying a diplomatic victory, Supreme Counselor," Kraft replied with feigned deference. "The Council is stronger without disruptive elements." Vex Nara's compound eyes fixed on him. "Is it?" The humans were participating in 15 separate technological exchange programs, 7 trade negotiations, and had offered their unique terraforming expertise to the drought worlds, all now suspended. Temporary setbacks, Nebula dismissed. Their technology can be replicated. Can it? Vexner asked. Their FTL navigation systems operate on principles our scientists still don't fully comprehend. Kraft waved dismissively. They'll be back once they realize their economic isolation is unsustainable. Zillik finally drained his drink. That assumes they need us more than we need them. Of course they do. Kraft laughed. What else could possibly happen? At that precise moment, my official communicator buzzed with an update. The Trade Commission was requesting an emergency session of the Council. Sometimes, the universe has a sense of humor, barely is it kind. First signs. The Emergency Trade Commission session convened 14 standard hours after the human delegation's departure. I arrived early to prepare my recording equipment, only to find the chamber already filled to capacity. Even species that typically send junior representatives had dispatched their highest officials. The tension was so palpable that several psychic species were wearing dampening helmets. Trade Commissioner Lorax Pell, a mercantin whose 6 eyes allowed him to simultaneously monitor multiple data feeds, called the session to order with uncharacteristic abruptness. The Commission has received 17 urgent communications regarding market disruptions following the human withdrawal, he announced without preamble. Before we address specific concerns, Director Quilna of the Galactic Economic Forecasting Division will present an overview. Director Quilna, a diminutive calcran whose species' neural pathways were evolved specifically for mathematical calculations, floated to the center of the chamber on her hover platform. Her skin pulsed with nervous calculations, never a good sign from a calcran, much less a respected delegate. Respected delegates, she began, her voice simultaneously translated into 246 languages, we are experiencing what humans would call a market correction, though in this case market collapse might be more accurate. Displays materialized around the chamber, showing plunging indicators and flashing alert symbols. Within 6 hours of the human withdrawal announcement, trading in 47 key commodities was suspended after reaching critical volatility thresholds. Most notably affected, quantum computing components, terraforming equipment, and entertainment media. Ambassador Kraft scoffed loudly. Entertainment media? Are we to believe the galactic economy trembles because we might miss the next human reality cooking show? Quilna's skin flashed in irritation. Human entertainment products account for 34% of all cross-species media consumption. The Great Squirming Chef franchise alone generates more revenue than the entire Zorlaxian manufacturing sector. Kraft's facial appendages drooped in shock as several delegates snickered. But these are merely symptoms, Quilna continued. The core issue is confidence. The humans had established themselves as reliable trading partners with unique goods. Their abrupt withdrawal has created market uncertainty. Investors and consumers fear similar disruptions with other species. Trade Commissioner Pell stepped forward. We've received reports that 17 human trading outposts throughout Council space have ceased operations. Their commercial vessels are returning to human territory. Most concerning, they're calling in all outstanding loans. That got everyone's attention. The humans, with their bizarre and aggressive financial systems, had become significant creditors to numerous worlds and corporations. Surely they can't expect immediate repayment, protested the Andoran representative, whose world had borrowed heavily for atmospheric reconstruction. They don't, Pell replied grimly, but their loan contracts contain acceleration clauses in the event of diplomatic breakdown. We ignored these provisions during negotiations, assuming they were standard human legal excess. Ambassador Zillik of the Andorian technocracy rose. What exactly does this mean in practical terms, Commissioner? Director Quilna answered, her calculations now pulsing so rapidly they blurred. It means that unless diplomatic relations are restored within 30 standard days, financial institutions across 14 systems may become insolvent. The cascading effects could trigger a galactic recession. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. Supreme Judicator Nevela broke it with a bitter laugh. So the primitives planned this all along, economic terrorism. Or, Zillik suggested quietly, prudent business practice when dealing with potentially unstable diplomatic partners. From my recording position, I noticed something odd. The Moldovan delegates weren't releasing anxiety pheromones. Instead, they were frantically communicating on their private channels. I discreetly adjusted my recording equipment to capture their conversation. Confirm package Omega has gone offline. Repeat, all human monitoring systems in the buffer zone have ceased transmitting. How interesting. What monitoring systems might those be? And more importantly, what were they monitoring? I would soon find out, along with everyone else. Economic fallout. By the third cycle after the human withdrawal, the initial market panic had evolved into a full-blown economic crisis. I found myself reassigned from the peace talks, now in disarray without human participation, to the Crisis Management Committee. My recording duties now consisted of documenting the slow-motion collapse of galactic commerce. The situation in the Cygnus arm is deteriorating rapidly, reported Financial Administrator Beeks Trillium, her holographic projection flickering due to bandwidth restrictions. Without human banking algorithms maintaining transaction security, fraud has increased 2,300%. The Planetary Bank of New Riel has declared insolvency. Council Chairperson Vex Nara rubbed her sensory ridges in obvious distress. What about the emergency protocols? The redundancy systems? Insufficient, answered Director Quilna bluntly, once vibrant calculation patterns now pulsing weakly, exhausted from continuous crisis modeling. The human banking system operated on mathematical principles unique to their evolutionary psychology. Their bizarre concept of acceptable risk allowed for efficiencies our more cautious systems cannot match. Ambassador Kraft, now considerably humbler than during the celebration, leaned forward. But surely our combined technological might can replicate their systems. They're just algorithms. Technical Director Ponvo, a mechanid whose body was more machine than organic, emitted a sound equivalent to a derisive snort. We've tried. Their code is extraordinarily counterintuitive. They employ something they call creative coding practices that defy standard documentation. Their financial systems run on what they termed duct tape and prayers, a methodology we cannot reproduce. And it gets worse, added Trade Commissioner Pell. The humans had been quietly supplying critical rare elements used in quantum processors, elements they synthesized through a proprietary process. Why weren't we informed of this dependency? Demanded Marshal Parallax. Pell's expression soured. Because 17 different corporations from 12 council species falsely claimed they could produce these elements themselves. They'd been secretly purchasing from humans and repackaging the products as their own. A chorus of muttering filled the chamber. Corporate deception was hardly unusual, but the scale was unprecedented. The humans call it just-in-time delivery, Quilna explained. They maintained minimal stockpiles, preferring continuous production. When they withdrew, the supply chain immediately collapsed. But the consequences extend beyond economics, interjected Security Coordinator Jens Talvo, speaking for the first time. The normally stoic Phobosian looked genuinely troubled, his stone-like features cracked with stress lines. The Moldovan delegation has reported complete sensor blackout in the buffer zone near the Sagittarius crossing. What does that have to do with humans? Nevela asked suspiciously. Everything, Talvo replied. The humans maintained an extensive early warning network throughout that region, at their own expense. They called it the Neighborhood Watch. Those sensors have gone dark. Early warning for what? Vexner asked, though I suspected many already knew the answer. For them, Talvo said simply. The swarm. The chamber went silent. Even the environmental systems seemed to pause. The swarm, the nightmare that had nearly consumed 3 galactic arms before being driven back a millennium ago. The reason the council existed in the first place. But the swarm has been dormant for centuries. Kraft protested weakly. And who do you think was watching to make sure it stayed that way? Talvo replied. Military consequences. The Galactic Defense Committee emergency session convened in a secure bunker 2 kilometers beneath the council chambers. I was granted access only after surrendering my standard recording equipment and submitting to 3 separate psychic scans for loyalty. My temporary replacement recorder was primitive, designed to be unhackable rather than efficient. The room buzzed with military personnel from dozens of species. Holographic displays showed star systems throughout the buffer zone, many flashing with alarming red warnings. Grand Admiral Thorne Blackest of the Unified Defense Fleet strode to the central platform. A Valkoran, with the characteristic metallic scales and imposing presence of his species, he wasted no time on formalities. We have confirmed swarm activity in 7 systems along the buffer zone, he announced grimly. Long-range scans indicate hive ships emerging from dormancy. Conservative estimates suggest we have between 15 and 20 standard days before they reach populated systems. Marshal Parallax slammed his armored fist down. Impossible. Our monitoring stations would have detected them months ago. Our monitoring stations are Blackest, replied coldly. We're operating at 40% capacity due to budget cuts approved by this very committee last cycle. The humans were supplying the supplementary coverage through their own network, and now we're blind. Security Coordinator Talvo concluded, worse than blind, corrected Fleet Intelligence Director Miravox, a diminutive Nexian whose species' neural structures allowed them to process vast amounts of tactical data. We're predictable. Without the human randomizing elements in our defense algorithms, the swarm will recognize our standard response patterns. That revelation sent visible shock waves through the assembled military leaders. The swarm was a hive intelligence that learned, adapted, and exploited patterns. Predictability was death. What about our weapons systems? Asked Supreme Judicator Nevela. Surely we can still fight. Admiral Blackest's expression turned even grimmer. The most effective anti-swarm weapons in our arsenal were designed by human engineers. They contain what the humans called black box components, proprietary technology that cannot be serviced without human technicians. Are you saying our primary defense weapons won't function? Vexner asked incredulously. I'm saying they'll function at approximately 62% efficiency, Blackest clarified. Enough to slow the swarm, not enough to stop them. Ambassador Zillik, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. Admiral, what was the human containment strategy for the swarm? Surely they must have had contingency plans. Director Vox answered instead. They called it the BBBQ protocol, which stands for prompted Vexra. Big bada boom quickly, Vox replied without a trace of humor. It involved deploying what humans called planet cracker weapons to destroy swarm hive ships before they could achieve momentum. Brutal, but effective. And do we have access to these weapons? Zillick pressed. Admiral Blackest and Director Vox exchanged uncomfortable glances. The weapons exist, Blackest admitted, but they're genetically keyed to human operators, a safeguard they insisted upon when joining the Council. The implications stunned the chamber into silence. So you're telling us, Ambassador Kraft said slowly, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated, that without the humans, we cannot effectively monitor the swarm, cannot efficiently fight the swarm, and cannot deploy the only weapons guaranteed to stop the swarm? That is precisely what we're telling you, Admiral Blackest confirmed. The humans weren't just participants in our defense network, they were its backbone. Desperate measures. The Grand Chamber of Reconciliation hadn't been used in over 3 centuries. The ornate room, with its ancient holographic murals depicting the founding of the Galactic Council, that normally remains sealed, a historical curiosity, rather than a functional space. Now, however, it bustled with frantic activity as delegates prepared for the most humiliating diplomatic initiative in recent galactic history. The human diplomatic frequency remains unresponsive, reported Communications Director Vex, her tendrils glowing with stress indicators. They've acknowledged receipt of our 73 formal requests for renewed dialogue but have provided no substantive response. Supreme Counselor Vexer looked exhausted. 4 days of continuous crisis management had dulled her normally vibrant exoskeleton. What about the unofficial channels? The cultural attaché, what was his name again? Ben Fletcher, I supplied from my recorder's position. And he has responded exactly once. Well, what did he say? Demanded Ambassador Kraft, who had been appointed to the Emergency Response Committee despite, or perhaps because of, his role in causing the crisis. I cleared my throat uncomfortably. His exact words were, "New comm system, who dis," followed by an animated image of a small earth creature called a raccoon washing cotton candy in water, watching it dissolve, and appearing distressed. Is that some kind of threat? Asked Marshal Parallax, alarmed. No, sighed Ambassador Zillick. It's human humor. They're mocking us. Mocking us while the swarm awakens, Neville hissed. These humans are more dangerous than we thought. The swarm is precisely why they're not responding. Zillick countered, they know our situation. They're waiting for us to offer real concessions, not empty apologies. The chamber erupted into overlapping arguments. I recorded 17 distinct shouting matches, 12 threats of diplomatic severance, and 1 ritualistic curse that would require a planetary cleansing ceremony to reverse. Supreme Counselor Vex Nara finally silenced the chaos by activating the ancient chamber's sonic dampening field, which made further argument physically impossible. Enough, she declared into the sudden silence. We have exhausted traditional diplomatic approaches. Director Quilna, what is the latest economic impact assessment? The Calcran's calculations now pulsed so slowly they were barely visible. Complete systemic collapse within 28 days. 16 worlds have already reported food distribution failures. The Federated Banking Collective has frozen all interstellar transactions. And the swarm? Vexner asked, turning to Admiral Blackest. 12 days until they reach the Arcturus colony cluster, he reported grimly. What can our evacuation transports handle? Perhaps 30% of the population. Vex Nara's compound eyes surveyed the desperate faces around her. Then we have no choice. We must send the humility delegation. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. The humility delegation was a diplomatic nuclear option, a tradition dating back to the Council's founding. It required the highest-ranking representatives of the offending parties to prostrate themselves, literally, physically, before the wronged species and beg forgiveness. No diplomatic initiative carried more weight, or more potential for humiliation. I will not debase myself before primitives. Ambassador Kraft declared, his facial appendages flushing with indignation. Then you condemn billions to death, Zillick replied simply. After much argument, a delegation was assembled, Ambassador Kraft, Supreme Judicator Neville, Marshal Parallax, and Supreme Counselor Vex Nara herself. I was assigned to record the historic mission. As our diplomatic vessel prepared to depart for Earth, I overheard a conversation between two junior staffers that perfectly encapsulated our situation. "Do you think the humans will accept our apology?" asked the first, a young Thrixian with anxiety-mottled skin. "I don't know," replied his Moldovan colleague, "but my cousin works in signal intelligence. He says human communication channels are buzzing with something they call memes about this situation." "Is that bad?" "One of the most popular ones shows their ancient warrior, Batman, slapping our ambassador craft, with the caption 'Talk smack, get whack.'" The humility delegation was not off to an auspicious start. Earth was not what any of us expected. Our diplomatic vessel was accompanied through the Sol system by human military vessels that eluded accurate tracking by our sensors, seemingly phasing in and out of conventional detection. The ships were ungainly, asymmetrical constructs that appeared hastily assembled from salvaged components. The Vesperians aboard our vessel displayed overt distaste for the absence of aesthetic harmony, but, valuing function above form, I observed a detail unnoticed by the others. These escort ships bore no resemblance to any known human vessel design in our database. They were novel, fabricated in the brief period since the diplomatic rupture, a testament to human activity. We were directed to a landing facility in a region designated Geneva, where a surprisingly modest reception awaited us. No elaborate delegation, no military display, merely 5 humans, the identical 5 who had departed our council chambers. Ambassador Priya Nakamura stood at the fore, adorned in what my database identified as business casual attire, complete with practical footwear. This was not formal diplomatic dress, nor even their military attire. The message was unambiguous: this meeting lacked the significance to warrant formal attire. How dramatically the situation had shifted. The humility delegation disembarked. Supreme Councilor Vexner led our procession, her ceremonial robes